All right, well, good evening, everyone. Can I welcome everyone watching online? We're being streamed around the world. And to the people watching online, just to prove we do have other people in the room as well as Julie and myself, maybe, do you all want to introduce yourself? No, actually, don't do that. Let's just have a round of applause just in the room, if we could, that'd be great. And another round of applause for the main woman herself, Julie, or Jay Malone.
Thank you.
My name's Mark Dennison, and you don't need to know anything about me. It's all about Jay and Julie this evening.
Do you mean to tell me that people don't know about you?
Well, if they don't, they don't need to. That's the thing.
They do.
Tonight is your night. Look, we're going to have a little reading or two from the new book. Do you just want to bring us up to date with where we are in the series? Because this has been a series and it's been a labour of love, hasn't it?
Yes, since 2005.
Right.
Before I actually start, I've been told just to mention the fact that some of the nibbles here and so on, even those that aren't nuts, may contain nuts. Okay, so just so that I've said that now. Right.
Great health and safety, that, wasn't it?
I know, I'm very good at that, you know. I had a good trainer.
Where's the emergency exit?
That way.
Okay, good.
And that way.
Good, great. We're clear on that.
And the toilets are that way.
Thank you.
Okay. Right. 18 years of storyline can't really be encapsulated in a couple of minutes. But the basic idea now is that young Sam, who was the hero of my first book, Silver Linings, he was 14 then. We've moved on 15 years. He's 29, married with a 3-year-old of his own. He has moved sort of a bit further back into the story now, and other people have come forward. So I have old characters and new characters. A few months before this one starts, there was, before I go any further, who's read Avarok's Return? How many of you have read Avarok's Return? How many times have you read it?
Did you like it? Good lad.
Careful
He
what you
can
say
stay.
here. The reason I ask that is because in Avarok's Return you have a massacre of one of the main elves in the book, in the series, plus 5 elflings. And Avarok is really a very nasty person, but he got his comeuppance at the end of Avarok's Return. So now we've moved on just a few months, and there's a 15-year-old witch and her her cousin, who's a couple of years older than she is. And between the two of them, they have helped to bring Avarok to his downfall, along with the other elves and a certain number of human people. Hello. And a few animals as well. So the books are actually a combination. A friend of mine who's sitting over there, Jeremy, once said they're a good combination of the natural world and the supernatural world. So I'm going to read this part. Now I read from this because I can make it double spaced and I can make it larger print, and it's a lot easier for me to read. So Morgan Landers is the 15-year-old. She's a reincarnated witch. The witches die. This has been going on over 5 centuries. The witches die, and then they're reborn very, very quickly into a baby that's suitable. And she's the most recent baby that's suitable. On that morning, all those weeks ago, Morgan had sensed a presence, but there was no one in sight. It was only when Bandit jumped onto the arm of her chair, nudged her elbow with his nose, and purred very loudly that she finally understood. It was recognised behaviour. It meant Armistice was about to enter Morgan's mind. Armistice, How are you? She asked sweetly. Bandit sensed rather than heard the reply. He sat up abruptly, taken aback by the sharp tone, but that was not like Armistice at all. And she goes on, I'm quite well, thank you, all in all, but what on earth is happening to my little house? It's been 15 years since I died, and it really is time someone took it over. It'll become dilapidated if it's left much longer. Oh, hello, Bandit, you little sweetheart. How's my favourite cat? Bandit purred and rubbed his chin against Morgan's cheek, his tail wound round her neck in a gentle cuddle. Armistice was no one to be scared of, and she'd lived such a long life that he'd been with her for longer than any of his other reincarnated companions. Morgan wasn't quite sure where to start. Well, to be honest, Armistice, I'm not really sure, but you know Charlie's been looking after it, and it's still in pretty good condition, Morgan answered. Yes, I know, and I'm grateful to him. He's been so good, but it just doesn't seem right. The cottage needs to be lived in. It needs someone to love it, she said, a little more calmly. Oh, I agree. It's not right, but the house itself has to take some of the blame for it still being vacant. Charlie tried telling it that if we have someone who would like to live there and she's family and would like to fit in, she could fit in. He said the house would love her. Armistice chuckled. Oh dear, why? What's the house done? And who are you talking about? Well, my cousin Jerica, of course. She's been living with us for quite a while, but she wants her own place, and your little cottage is perfect. Whenever the estate agents arrange for people to view it, there would be an awful smell, or the place would be infested with ants, mice, even rats. The viewers instantly lost interest and left in a hurry, which meant another possible sale had fallen through, and in the end the agents stopped taking people around and took it off their books. Smell? What kind of smell? Well, you know, that horrible stink where male cats have been spraying their scent around. Bandit raised his head and looked at Morgan quizzically. Oh, no offence, Bandit, she laughed and stroked the top of his head. I know you're far too clean and self-respecting to do that. Bandit lowered his head to rest his chin on his front paws again, and Morgan was convinced she could see a shadow of a smile on his face. Oh, yes, that smell. Well, no wonder people were put off. You're going to have to do something about it, though. The house needs someone living in it. Me? Why should it be down to me to do something about sorting out your house? Well, I can't do it, can I? Oh, for goodness sake, Morgan, it has to be you, because you're the new me, silly. The house will know you, and you will have to show it who's boss. Me. I mean you, of course. Well, I needed something else to do, didn't I, Bandit? It's as if worrying about my exam grades and that lot not letting me sleep again last night. Morgan rolled her eyes. So did Bandit. Anyway, how are things where you are? Morgan asked, trying to change the subject. Although she had a soft spot for Armistice, she'd never quite become comfortable with their conversations, rare though they were. It was very odd to be talking to your former self and to have her image swirling around in your mind while you're trying to think of things to say. Didn't exactly make for a relaxed chat, but this time anyway, Armistice seemed to have plenty to say. Oh, do stop feeling sorry for yourself, dear, Armistice said in her usual forthright manner. Many of your visitors last night have been through so much worse than you, and of course I remember Celine Fern. I followed on after her, just as she followed on for Bridie Burrows. I never actually came across Bridie, although I would have liked to, but Celine visited me for a while. Then she just ceased her visits. So I do understand what it's like when your previous beings pop into your head. Can't say I was sorry when Celine stopped visiting, although I did quite like her. Yes, I know, but... Bandit dropped to the ground, his eyes wide, ears back, almost flattened to the side of his head, whiskers twitching. He'd gone into hunting mode, staring at a point near the fence, distracting Morgan from a chat with Armistice. She tried to see what he was concentrating on so intently, and saw a slow swaying of the tall grass. Whatever it was heading their way, and Bandit lay flat against the side of the tree trunk, his eyes narrowed, his chin almost on his front paws. He'd slouched down as low as he could, and his tail lashed about furiously, his attention now firmly fixed on whatever was causing the blades of grass to bow and bend. Never taking his eyes off the movement, he uttered a low growl. Morgan craned her neck as she tried to see what it was that Bandit had found so fascinating, but it was still screened within the grass. Armistice was impatient, but just at that moment, a black and yellow-collared, grey-green grass snake slithered into view. Bandit sat bolt upright but didn't move. His head turned as his gaze followed the snake as it slithered onwards beyond the tree trunk, seemingly unaware of being watched, and it vanished under a bush. Well, it'll be likely to be heading towards the ponds, Morgan said to the fascinated cat. The rain will have topped them up overnight. There'll be plenty of frogs and toads and newts feeding on the insects this time of year. That'll be a much fatter snake in a couple of hours. Excuse me, we were talking, remember? Armistice brought Morgan back to the conversation. Oh yes, of course. Sorry, I was watching Bandit. What was it you wanted me to do? Just go to the house. She was clearly running out of patience. Now! Now? Why now? Because this has gone on far too long. You're only a few minutes away, and as you're just sitting around, you clearly have spare time on your hands. So let's not waste any more of it. You're joking, right? I came here for a bit of peace and quiet, and now you want me to go and sort out your house. It's all right for you appearing as and when you want. But I don't have a choice with any of you. One minute I'm thinking my own thoughts, and the next, you or Mary or any of them are taking over my head, and it's not fair. Then you suddenly appear and tell me that after 15 years, it all needs to be done right at this minute. Honestly, Armistice, does it? Morgan's protest appeared to have no effect whatsoever. Yes, it does. The house has had its own way for far too long. There's no time to spare. Besides, it won't be expecting you. So you'll catch it off guard. And if you don't go now, I'm going to stay in your head until you do, so there. And little Miss Moni, don't forget that when your time comes to die, you can break into your successor's thoughts just like we do. You can get your revenge then. But for now, just get on with it. Thank you.
I've often wondered what's it like reading your own words.
Rubbish.
No, but are you kind of going through and almost editing and thinking, oh yeah, I remember why I wrote that and why I chose that word? And
it's quite funny actually, because as you go through, one of the things that I found about When Wolves Cry, I actually changed the dateline in it, and then I had to go back. I had to go back and fix the change, and and then you realise that there's even more areas where you'd mention things, and your dateline's all out of sync then, and it can get very weird. And with Fool's Gold, I wrote the first few chapters of that, and I knew how I wanted it to end. So I wrote the last few chapters, and then I found it particularly difficult because I had to go back and build the bridge between the two sections, and that was a bit strange, I must admit. Yeah. I suppose I've enjoyed this one, but I actually feel a bit bereft, to be honest. I've had these characters in my head for about 18 years, some of them, and these places, these people, but it's just nice to suddenly come across a new character that you didn't have any idea you were going to be including in a book when you first started it.
So is this it then? Because we've been talking about the series. No, but I mean, I know you've been talking about it, and it must feel strange. We'll talk about how you feel about some of those characters in just a minute, but you might be thinking this is it, but could you be persuaded? Is there any way you can pick it up again?
I think what's more likely to happen with From Night to Nave, there are three characters in the first part of it. There's Will Hallett, who's the hero. There's his friend Arthur Burnell. And there's a very strong, middle-aged woman. And I do like writing about very strong, middle-aged women. Because there's quite a few of us around, aren't there, ladies? And Edith Chapman. She's absolutely superb. She's on her third marriage. Very tough, really, really tough, but with a heart of goose down, basically. And several people have asked me to write their backstories. Will, for instance, doesn't appear in the book until he's 20. And there's already a little bit about his background in there. But I actually found him quite a fascinating character. and his mother, who married Beneatha, married a blacksmith, and she educated Will and his brother, so they could read and write. And we're talking about 1356 in this case, so not many people could read and write in those days. So, yeah, I just find those characters quite interesting. So it's more likely that if I do go back into the Winton series,
Yeah.
that's where it'll
To
be.
develop some of those
Yeah.
characters a bit. Did you feel more pressure in a way, pressure on yourself? Because all the time you're thinking, I've got to tie up these loose ends and this is going to be it for now. Did it take longer to write?
I don't think it did take longer to write, to be honest, and I don't think I actually felt any great pressure because I quite enjoyed rounding off some of these stories. I just felt the time was right to say, that's it, that's the end. It was time for closure.
Right.
So,
You've mentioned some of the characters already.
yeah, I have.
Which are you particularly attached to and why?
Well, I think Charlie Noel, I have to be attached to him because he's Father Christmas. With his other hat on. So I think, yeah, him, Sam Johnson, because Sam went through a fairly tough time. And Sam's the one that's now 29. There's a few other characters in there that I'd sort of quite taken to over the years. Isabel Mackenzie, for instance, another strong middle-aged woman who's a scenes of crime officer from Glasgow. You know, takes no prisoners, this lady. Yeah, there's a few people in there. Bandit, I'm especially fond of, because he keeps coming back, and he was our cat. So, yeah. So yes, Bandit is always going to be around, I think.
Yeah.
So, but I couldn't fit him into From Night to Nave before all this. But years and years ago, I read a book that included a French witch. Her name was Melusine. Have you heard of her? I thought you might. Yeah, yeah. And so the ravens in this series, Melusine is a very strong raven character in it. So, who am I going to miss the most? I don't know. I think I have got to the point now where I actually feel that's it, done. So, it was hard. Yeah.
And just going back to, because it was interesting what you mentioned about the timeline thing. Did you do anything similar with this book? Did you have to make any alterations? Because I'm just wondering if you'd got an idea in your mind about some of those characters, what you were going to do with them, and then did you change your mind later on?
No, it was more a question of exam time. When I started writing this one, Morgan was due to take her exams, and then I realised later on that I'd moved on a couple of months, so she would have already taken them. So I then had to go back and take out any reference to exams coming up and change it to waiting for results.
Right.
So it was just odd things like that. But I suppose because I knew that this was the final one, my mind's been more working on what comes next.
Yeah. But this is the thing, you see. I mean, in your line of work, you've got to be quite decisive, really, haven't you? This is where I couldn't do what you do because, well, no, especially when it comes to the ending. I often think once you've made your mind up, you've got to stick with it. I would be forever going back, oh, I'll just tweak that, I'll change. Before you know it, you then have a different ending.
Well, I'm not frightened to kill off characters. And there's... I like that. To be honest, I've actually... This isn't going out anywhere, is it, Greg? I've
We're
actually
definitely
taken
not streaming it. I mean, this is just in this room.
I've taken revenge on 2 police officers that I really didn't like that I used to work for. Or with. And I love that bit. So, and I've named them. But they're a long way away, and they're probably retired by now anyway. So, but I did enjoy that.
Yeah, yeah.
So, yeah.
Okay. We're going to throw the floor open in a few minutes, by the way, so any questions you might have, feel free. I wonder what comes next for you then. I mean, apart from maybe, when the time's right, coming back to some of these characters and exploring them in more depth and detail, what else are you thinking of doing?
Ace Malone, Boy Detective, The Case of the Missing Cat. At the moment, he's 2.5. In the book, he's 10.
Right.
With a telescope. I'm being signalled at. What? Oh, sorry. That bit will get edited out.
He's got his head in his hands now.
He loves me,
look.
really. And if anybody doesn't know, that's my boy. My wee boy, my baby. Also, daddy of Ace. So, as soon as we knew his name, I just said straight away, Ace Malone, Boy Detective. That's going to work, isn't it? So, yeah. So there's that one. Plus the series of animal stories that I have for younger children. I'm going to be, in fact, I've already started writing another one of those based on rescue dogs, very much to do with what I know of our Maisie, who was, she was a Romanian street dog. We got her when she was 2.5, and she was in kennels in a rescue centre for about 7 months. Mm-hmm. We've had her 7 years now. So yeah, I'm going to be doing a bit of investigation in how the dogs are brought over and that sort of thing. But I'm going to write this about what I know of what happened and what generally happens to Eastern European dogs.
Yeah.
You've got a rescue as well, haven't you?
Yeah. They're interesting, aren't they, rescue dogs?
Yeah, they are.
You never really know what's going on.
No, but you know that something has. And
Yeah,
you know that they all have
it's really
issues
sad,
of some
actually.
kind.
Yeah.
I'm also compiling a book of short stories. I've got about 8 or 9 written so far, and I want 12. And then I've got a crime book that I'm going to write that's going to be based here on Gozo and Tenerife, and very much underwater. And my son learned, he was a trained diver when he lived in Tenerife for 4 years. So any technical information, I know where to go. So
one or two things.
yeah.
You won't get bored.
No, and I can't die yet.
Took a dark turn.
I'm too busy.
Blimey. Yeah. And just before my kind of final question, and then I know you're going to read again, and then these lovely people can ask some questions. You mentioned there, there's some of the children's books, and I know, because we've kind of talked about this before, you're very passionate about that, and I know that side of being involved in children's writing will continue. But as well as that, aren't you sort of lending older people a bit of a helping hand as well?
Yeah. Some years ago, I ran the children's competition. Well, some years ago, set up, it was 2 or 3 different events that we went to, craft fairs and that sort of thing, and we'd find that older people would come up and start chatting to us about, oh, I've been writing short stories, or I've been trying to write a book, and so on. But I'm 60 now, and nobody takes me seriously. So I thought, okay, well, we set up a competition for over 55s for short stories. 20 of them, we got the funding through for 20 of them. to be published. And there were 3 ladies who'd written children's stories. Now, all the others that were selected, they were very much more adult based. But these 3 ladies had written these beautiful children's stories, and I thought, can't waste these. So got them published as well. Granny's Tales.
Right.
They were just absolutely brilliant. And yeah, yes, I've run workshops. I ran a writing group and so on for a few months until COVID hit, and then that stopped. And it's never really sort of come back up again. But I am starting in January a 6 weekly course, free, again, same as I do with the children's ones, and it'll be at the Arnold Library. So I'm just waiting for people to let me know whether they'd like to come along to it or not, and give me what days are best for them, and I'll get it booked up.
Great, lovely. Just before we open the floor then to some great questions.
Oh.
Notice how I haven't asked any very good questions at all, because I thought I'd leave that to people in the room. Are you going to read another excerpt from your lovely book? Yeah. You told me before you had 2 you were going to
Well, I've got another.
choose
I've got
from.
2.
Right. Have you decided which one you're going to do?
Yeah, this one.
Was there a good interview and a bad interview option? Was there a reading you were going to do just to pick up the room again, or?
No,
Right.
no. To be quite honest with you, the reason I thought I'd like to do this one is because I can do a Cockney accent.
Ah,
You know, us Londoners. Right, this character, he's in Silver Linings. He's one of a group of crooks that have worked locally. But he's knocking on a bit. He's been back in prison, and the lady of the manor, he helped her out for over a couple of things, and she promised to give him a job. And that's exactly what she's done. So Jake's regular day off each week was usually Saturday, unless of course he had reason to change it. However, unless there was a break in his routine, on a Friday evening he was likely to be found at the Three Horseshoes public house, standing at the bar, enjoying a couple of pints of potholer, a locally brewed real ale, while chatting to Mary, the pub landlady, about how well, or how badly, the England cricket team were doing during their international matches. Both avid fans of the game, their conversations often consisted of celebrating when the team did well or analysing why they'd done so badly. In fact, if England were playing test matches against Australia for the Ashes, Mary was rarely seen behind the bar, and Jake would go missing from his duties at the trout farm. They'd both be found in their respective homes glued to the television, and no one disturbed Mary during the game, not even her husband Stanley. Unless it was an emergency, of course, and even Stanley would think twice before he knocked on the living room door. If there were no matches to talk about, Jake was equally happy playing darts or dominoes for an hour or so if there was anyone to play against. On this particular Friday evening, there were only a handful of customers, which gave Jake and Mary time to hold an inquest on the previous week's England Test match against South Africa, which, sadly for Jake and Mary, South Africa had won easily. When Mary had to leave Jake to serve another customer, Jake sat at ease on a stool at the bar, just people watching for a while until Mary came back. 2 men he could not recall ever having seen before were sitting at a nearby table, speaking in hushed voices, but Jake's hearing was very good, and the only other conversations in the room were coming from a courting couple sitting near the window. Jake smiled at seeing they were holding hands across the table. And Mary, who was talking to a customer at the other end of the bar. Although Jake had missed the early part of what the 2 men, one of whom he overheard was called Frank, was saying, he couldn't help but overhear mention of a break-in at the Freeman farm, which was a little under 3 miles outside the village. Jake knew the Freemans were not particularly wealthy. I mean, farming was not an easy way of life, and their times of being financially comfortable had passed. While the price of animal feed having shot up, regulations more and more difficult to follow, the unseasonal heavy rain during the previous spring having battered down new shoots and flooded fields, and the long, dry, hot spell that followed the wet spring had conspired to create a disastrous year. Those plants that had survived the deluge soon withered and died under the burning sun, and the much-needed harvest had been a failure, causing a devastating financial loss. Another year like that, and Jake knew a number of farmers locally would be financially ruined. In fact, Jake had heard that Peter Freeman had been so desperate to save his farm, he'd put up for sale 2 of the fields in the upper section of his land. That area was high enough to never have a problem with flooding and might well suit a housing development. Jake had heard that a couple of businessmen had visited the farm, inspected the land for sale, and gone back to the farmhouse to discuss a deal with Peter and his wife. But after that, the Freemans had heard nothing more. Now there had been the devastating break-in. With his experience of working with the lawless fraternity, Jake's criminal radar told him there was very possibly a link between the visit and the break-in. Jake finished his pint, waved goodbye to Mary, and headed home. During the rest of the evening, parts of the overheard conversation kept popping into his head, and he mulled over what he'd heard while watching QIXL on the television. Following that was a new Australian comedy which he thought might be worth watching, but after a while decided he couldn't make head or tail of what was going on, so decided it was time for bed, but then discovered the snooker was on. In his pyjamas and dressing gown, he settled back comfortably in his cosy winged armchair to watch, but fell asleep 15 minutes later. He woke cold and aching a little before 1 o'clock in the morning, turned off the television, unplugged it at the wall, and headed up to bed, reminding himself that he had to find Charlie later that morning. After breakfast, deep in thought and oblivious to the birds singing in the trees or insects buzzing around him, Jake walked at a fairly brisk pace along the deer-hoof rotted path, looking neither left or right, but mainly at where he was going. After a little over 10 minutes of this vigorous exercise, Jake couldn't help keep up that pace any longer, and slowed to a comfortable walking speed that didn't make his heart race. The closely packed canopy of trees trapped damp warmth within its covering, making Jake feel as though he was in a tropical rainforest. Plus, if he was honest with himself, he would have been the first to admit that if he exercised more, he might have coped with the humidity a little better. Beads of sweat gathered under his khaki bucket hat and slid down the side of his face. Rummaging about in his jeans pocket, he found his handkerchief and used it to mop the sweat on his face and neck. Oh, at least when you had your comb over, it kept the sun off your head. Now you're bald, your head burns, and you have to wear a hat, and then your head gets sweaty. He sighed. I don't know, if it ain't one thing, it's another. Can't blooming win either way. Oh well, I suppose it's what happens when you get older. He put his hat, with its inside seam now damp, back on, tied the handkerchief loosely around the back of his neck, and moved on. Anyways, can't be far now. Where some sections of the path were in shadow, the warmth of the sun had not been able to fully dry the earth under the hefty rainfall, and chunks of sludgy mud stuck to his boots, making walking an even more strenuous task, and his legs were aching. Other areas where the sun was able to reach through the dense canopy of trees and tall bracken, the glare was so bright it hurt his eyes when it glinted through the foliage in sharp flashes. Should have maybe taken another path, me old mate, Jake said to himself. And next time, bring your sunglasses with you, daft aper, don't you? Under the shadow of the very large and very old oak tree, Jake stopped again, this time to get his breath. He was about to move on when he thought he saw a slight swaying of the fern fronds to his left. It was so fleeting he almost missed it, but he could have sworn that for a split second he saw a grey tail poking up above the leaves. He stopped and stared. The tail vanished, but something was moving parallel with the path he was on and in the same direction, but hidden within the undergrowth. For a moment he thought it might be a badger, then he remembered badgers' tails were nothing like the one he'd just glimpsed. They were not that long and they didn't point upwards. It was the wrong colour for a fox, and badgers and foxes are mostly nighttime prowlers. It must have been a large dog. That thought satisfied him for a moment, but when he thought about it a little more, the rippling of the ferns had continued after he'd seen the tail move on. There must have been something else with the dog. But a person would have been more obvious. Well, whatever it was, or they were, had vanished, leaving him very confused and not a little unnerved. He shook his head vigorously. Well, don't just stand there, you daft fool. Your imagination's playing tricks on you. He looked round again just to be sure, but there was no tail, and other than a slight swaying as the breeze fanned them, the ferns were still. There was nothing out of the ordinary to see, and just at that moment he heard the sound of an axe chopping wood a little way ahead. Right, then. I come here to talk to Charlie, and there he is. He walked on, determined to forget what he thought he saw, but every now and then he couldn't help but take a quick glance behind, just in case. Thank you.
Right then, time for your questions now, and Moira is armed with a microphone. Who would like, and when you ask a question you've got to do it in a Cockney accent, I've just decided. Who would like to...
Still, how about a Geordie one?
Oh, or a Geordie accent. Or your own. So who would like to ask a question first? Great.
Oh, Nathan.
So how long have you been writing for?
I wrote my first book when I was 12, Nathan.
You're meant to say only a few years ago then.
So only a few years ago.
Well done. Yep. It's my friend, aren't you, Nathan?
Good lad.
Yeah, I was living in Dorset at the time, and it was based on the female pharaoh Hatshepsut. I had a total obsession with Egyptology at the time. And then we moved back to London, and I've got a funny feeling my mother must have thrown it out as sort of just paper, because I never saw it again. And then because of, in those days you could leave school at 15, and so with the move and settling into a new school and that sort of thing, I started work 2 weeks after my 15th birthday. So I never really got around to writing again. Not until I was 55.
I mean, what would you say is your favourite book that you've ever written?
Sorry?
What would you say is your favourite book that you've ever written?
Oh. At one time I would have said each one of the Winton series was a favourite for... they all had their own reason for being a favourite. But I think probably it has to be From Night to Nave. I did so much research for that one, and there were so many things that were mentioned in the other books that I gave answers to in that one. And the history, I loved researching it.
So is that book kind of like putting all the pieces together in the other books?
It's a prequel to all the others. You've got it, haven't you, Andy?
Yes. Please don't ask me if I've read it, because it's on my pile of books to read.
Oh.
Very good questions.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Yes.
you, Nathan.
Thanks,
Very
Nathan.
good. Any more for any more? Lady just behind you there at the back there.
Will you be writing more historical novels?
Hopefully. Yeah, hopefully, Amanda.
So what will be next?
Well, I've got to finish the ones that I'm working on at the moment. But then I think you might have missed when you came in, before you came in, I was talking about giving backstories to 3 of the characters.
No, I heard that.
Yeah, you heard that, yeah. So that they are definitely going to be historical because they're going to be before 1356. So.
I'm just reading that From Night to Nave for about the 3rd or 4th time.
Oh, bless you.
I just can't leave it alone. It's
Oh,
brilliant.
thank you so much. No,
Have you got a question you want to?
When will the book be out then?
When will the book be out?
well, this one is now available, but it's going to be a little while. I've got to finish the others that I've got planned before I start thinking about going back to the history book. But
Yeah, Julie, you said before I finished the others, typically, how many books do you write at any one time? How many do you have on the go, and how do you juggle that?
2 small books, like these, the ones for children, for younger children, and 2 short stories that I'm working on at the moment. Gives me something to do.
You mentioned a crime book, Julie.
Sorry?
You mentioned a crime book.
Yeah.
They're my first go-to type of books.
Right.
How soon have I got to wait for that one?
That's the most polite way of saying,
Just get on with it.
Julie, will you just crack on?
I think the aim is to have it finished by the end of next year. Yeah. Sorry?
Next year's Christmas present sorted. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the plan. We went to Gozo the first week of our honeymoon was in Gozo, a particular hotel. And for our 30th wedding anniversary, we went back there to the same hotel to be there on our anniversary. And they were absolutely lovely to us, you know. We hadn't been there in 30 years, but, you know, the fact that we went back. And I mentioned to the manager, I said, would you mind if I include this hotel in this particular... Please do. Yes, we'd be delighted. So I'm hoping to get at least a couple of days free when I get back.
Any more questions? Oh,
Yeah, you know, you obviously read to Ace and tell him stories. Do you make them up? You know, do you make stories up in your head and just tell him the story?
No.
And if you do, are you going to write them down?
No, we haven't been there in the evenings. That will come later. Mind you, he does have all my books. So, yeah.
You know, when you do, when you're babysitting and things and he's round for the weekend or whatever, you'll have to let us know if you do. Because I just wondered, because, you know, we'll read stories, but we'll make them up as well, and obviously they're often pretty rubbish, but yours will be a lot better than ours.
I wouldn't bet on it.
I think they probably will.
No, because they do sort of need a bit of time to... I don't know, I've never actually tried.
You know when you do,
Yeah.
let me know.
Yeah, I will do. Yeah.
Because I think your mind will probably be...
Well, it's definitely better than being at work.
Spending time with your old workmates.
No, that was the good part of it.
another question.
Hi, Julie.
Hi, Andy.
I'm just thinking that when I'm at work and have a complicated email to write, I'm going to write it 3, 4, 5 times before I get it right.
Right.
Whereas your novels are multiple entwined threads covering a multiple of backstories of tied together series. How many times do you write a single book before you're happy with the end product?
Generally, when you're editing, you go over it maybe about 5 times. Wouldn't you say, Moira? You know.
And the rest.
Sorry.
And the rest.
I've sort of taken this from some a lot better known authors than me, who say that by the time you get to the 5th edit, give it up. You know, just get it done, because if you could go over it and over it and over it, and you could keep on changing it, you could keep on seeing different things, you could keep on seeing something that you could have taken off in a different direction. So you have to get to a point where you decide, no, that's enough.
I'm going to use 5 as my number for my emails then, thank you.
I have a question for you, Julie.
Yes, love.
When you are thinking, I'm going to write about this and put it into a book, do you have an outline? Do you just have a vague idea? Or do you really plot meticulously? How do your stories come out of your head and onto the page?
Yeah, I'm no J.K. Rowling, planning for 7 years' worth. Generally, an A4 page, ruled page, 1 to 25 in the margin, keywords for each number is a chapter, keywords on each line, just to remind me of what I'm doing. And then by the time I've got to number 5, throw it away, the book's writing itself. Yeah. Whoa!
So your stories, are they very much influenced by things you see in your life, or do you often dream things?
You tend, I think the best thing to do when you're writing is to at least bring in some experiences. So you can actually talk with some kind of authority. Things like in the first book, Silver Linings, the bullying that my daughter went through actually happened when she was 8 years old. You know, that happened. The character that happens to in Silver Linings is 14. I know about Wells in Somerset. I know Wookey Hole. I know quite a few places within that area, so for me it's quite an easy task to write about Glastonbury, or, you know, sort of invent a village in that area.
So it's your imagination of a story. It's nothing that you kind of wake up one morning and have a dream and think, God, that would make a great story, or...
I have done that, but then I've gone back to sleep and forgotten it. So, yeah, I'm not one of these that remembers to have a notepad by the bed, unfortunately. But what I do enjoy about writing is the fact that I'm writing something and somebody who I had no idea about just appears, because I have to put someone in a situation and I can invent someone. I can create a character, and I think that's one of the things that I enjoy most about writing, is actually creating characters and making them, to me anyway, to making them real.
Julie, I was really interested on how you said the book writes itself. Sort of once you get to chapter 5, it's sequential. In my head, I was wondering, are there any books where you've thought of the end chapter and you've had to write it in reverse to try and pull it back together?
No, I don't think I've ever done that. Not kind of in reverse. Not a whole chapter. Odd bits, I think. Oh, well, I could change that sentence around, I could make that different. I think one of the things that, if you're writing, I think one of the things you need to do until you really get to know your characters is to make sure that you have a physical description of them all individually, so you don't change the colour of their hair or the colour of their eyes, or, you know, because it can be difficult not to make those kind of mistakes. Or having to go back in the book and think, where's that person, because I need to know how I described them before. So I think that's quite important.
I was just wondering about the characters and how you keep track of them. Do you, as you start to develop them, you've got your physical description, do you keep a notebook or a timeline for each of them?
I used to, but I know them pretty well now. So these people actually live in your head, don't they?
Oh, yes.
Yes.
It's disturbing.
Yeah, they do, don't they, Ian? Yeah, yeah. So, no, I've got to know them pretty well. Some of them become, you visualize everything that they're going through. You go through it with them. You put them through really, really dreadful situations sometimes. And it's very hard to kill a character that you love. But sometimes you have to do that to make the story move on.
You did say, Julie, that you're quite happy to kill off your characters if necessary.
She did. She definitely did.
I did. But only if necessary. No, just out of sheer enjoyment, one or two of them.
She was too soft with that priest, though.
Sorry?
Bit of feedback there.
Yeah, there's quite a few people actually that have said that the priest should have suffered more for much longer. Yeah, I have to say that was a scene I absolutely loved writing. Yeah.
Any more questions? Anyone from over this side? Oh, oh.
Develop some of Chris Knowles' characters in a separate book.
No.
Not with all the wildlife and all the all the fancy people that you've got living in the wood. I want them to extend.
Spin-offs. I suppose to some extent, when I first started writing Werewolves Cry, it was going to be a Morgan Jerrica spin-off. I suppose to some extent it is, but the other characters in it are also sort of quite involved, I suppose is the best word for it. Yeah.
Got time for a couple more questions?
Yeah.
Nathan?
Have you ever written any dystopian stories?
Have I ever what?
Have you ever written a dystopian story?
Dystopian story. Have you written one?
No, I haven't, but I would have thought to some extent that, I don't know, actually, thinking about it, maybe one of the short stories.
I mean, have you ever thought about writing a novel of a dystopian kind of story?
Not along those kind of lines. You mean something like you were writing before for the competition?
Yeah, but obviously a bit more catastrophic.
I've got a funny feeling that some of the things that happen to some of the people in my books pretty catastrophic anyway. You remember interviewing Nathan, don't you? Yeah.
I do, yeah.
Well, I'm here.
I'm very glad you are.
You're
as
a good
well.
lad.
Good questions.
Yeah.
Any more questions from anyone? Well, if not, no? Okay. Okay, go ahead. Yeah, please. We'll get a microphone to you.
Thank you very much. This lady's one of the most beautiful people in this world, and if you're lucky enough to be her friend, cherish your friendship. Her children's books are so lovely with kindness in them always, and you've worked hard and you've helped an awful lot of people and children love books and love reading. You've achieved so very much, so well done, Jay.
Thank you, darling. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sandra.
Well, that seemed like a very nice... Thank you for that. It was lovely. Yeah. A very nice moment to say thank you for now, but we do have some Prosecco, no Secco.
We have Zero Secco, we have Rosé Prosecco, and we have normal Prosecco.
Yeah. So do feel free to have a chat with Julie as well, and thank you very much indeed for coming along. Thanks for watching on the stream as well, and maybe one final round of applause for Jay as well. That would be lovely.
Thank you. Thanks for coming, everybody. I really appreciate it. It was lovely. Thank you. And I'm going to say thank you to Elaine as well. Bless you. Thank you. It's good of you. Greg, thank you, my darling.
Thanks, Greg.
Yeah. And thank you, Mark.
Pleasure. Absolute
the
pleasure.
Old mate.
That's all right.
Thank you.
Anytime.
And just before I finish, I just want to say that I couldn't do any of this without that man standing up over there. Thank you, my darling.
Great. There we are. Well done.
Bless you. Thank you.